Hey everybody, it's Crys'Dawna. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I didn't get to do a great intro on here, but I did want to walk you guys through. We just moved back to the US to our Maine farmhouse that was built in 1760. And right now what we did is we took the measuring tape and we're actually customizing this table size to our dining room. And so at the end, we put down some tape so that we could kind of visualize, and it ended up being a 4-foot by 7-foot build. So I'm gonna walk you guys through exactly how I did this, and I hope you enjoy it. So my guess is it's probably quite loud out here for you guys. We went to Lowe's. I have all the lumber for the table, and so I am going to start unloading this lumber and we're going to start building the table. I do have to change the blade on my miter saw, and so I'm going to do that and then we will get started. I did decide, I think I'm just gonna do a whole new redo of the dining room. So this video will be just the table build, and then I'm gonna do one with what I do in the dining room because I'm gonna do something on one of the accent walls. The first thing I did was unload all of my lumber. I like to get all of my lumber unloaded and in one place so that way I know exactly what I'm working with and that I grabbed everything. So I am taking my measuring tape. I'm going to be cutting the legs, which these are 4x4s. So I'm taking my measuring tape and I'm going to measure where I want the legs. And then what I'm going to do is take my speed square, and that way I know that I can make a line that is straight. So when I put this up on my miter saw table, I am going to be able to cut this straight. I have a Hitachi miter saw and I have a little stand that it connects to, and right now I am adjusting all of the arms on here so that way it is sitting flush with everything, because this will help your wood be a little bit more secure on your area. If your wood, when you're going to cut it, is wobbly or uneven, it runs the risk of your saw blades stopping because it doesn't like weird pressure. So you want to make sure that your wood is pushed up against that backing plate flush. And if you have a stand, make sure that everything is flush and even. The lumber I'm cutting right now is a 4x4, which is thicker. So what I like to do is I like to go down halfway, come up, and then go the rest of the way. I don't like to go down and cut it in one motion. I've just found over the years that it works better for the way that I like to do stuff. So once I've done that, then now I'm going to, on my little table, I'm going to measure and cut the rest of it. And one thing I want to note too is before I start cutting a piece of wood, I have the saw blade going right above. So I turn the saw blade on right above the piece of wood, and then I go down into the wood to cut it. Right now I am just kind of tapping the piece of wood to get it aligned properly. I always cut my wood on the outside of the line that I drew. It's always better to have it a little bit bigger and have to kind of cut it down than it is to cut it short, because then you won't be able to use the board. Right now I am just stacking the legs on top of one another so that I can line them up and make sure that it feels flush. Usually you can tell, as long as when you can rub your hands across it and there's no extra on one side, then they're usually pretty good. Anytime that I'm building something, especially with 2x4s, I always cut the end of the 2x4 off, because sometimes it is not always even, and so I always cut the ends of my lumber off so that way I know, especially if it has to join to another piece of lumber, that it's going to have a proper and square end so that way it can join together. So right now I am just kind of cutting the end, and you can see right here, I'm going to show you, I always cut on the outer side of the line that I draw. For this build I am going to use pocket holes, and what these are made with a Craig jig, and this is a depth guide right here. And so you see right here the wood goes to 1.5, and so I am going to adjust my drill bit down. There's a window and you can see the little circle, it's 1.5. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to loosen it, and then I'm going to put it down to where the 1.5 is in that little window of the collar. I'm going to tighten it, and then that is set for my drill. I do like to use a corded drill when I do woodworking because it's when you're using a cordless drill, a lot of times it dies. But this right here for this Kreg jig, I'm going to adjust the plate as well to 1.5. So that way when I clamp my wood in there, it's going to be the proper size for everything. And so I am going to put the piece of wood in there, and then you're going to see I'm going to use my drill and I pulsate. So it's kind of the same concept I do when I am cutting my wood. I like to go in, come out, and then go in. It just makes it a little bit easier to be able to make these pocket holes. So that is what I do when I am making pocket holes, is I go in and then I come out and then I go back in, and you're going to see that it makes the proper size pocket hole so that I can join these side skirts with the legs. For this particular plan, it called for the side skirts to be inset on the legs about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just marking from the edge of the 4x4, and then I'm going to make a line so I know where to put the legs. Before I join these, I always use wood glue, and so I'm going to add some wood glue, and then I'm going to line up the 2x4 on that line that we made. I always put the pocket holes on the inside. You don't want to put them on the outside because you don't want to see those pocket holes. When your table is sitting there, you don't want to see the pocket holes. So make sure that you're putting those on the interior part of where the table is going to be. You can use a clamp. Kreg does have clamps, but I like to just do it this way. And so I'm going to slowly pulsate that screw into that other piece of wood until it joins. And then what I'm going to do is make sure that it is even. So you want to make sure before you do the second screw that it is still lined up with that line, and then you can insert the second screw. What I did is I built the base completely before I went on to any other parts. So what I'm doing right here is I am just joining the entire base, so that way we can make sure everything is flat and flush and looks good before we go on to the next step. Okay, so for the next thing that I did, there's a cross beam of a 4x4 that goes across the table. And what I did is I took my miter saw and I cut individually so I could break that out. And then you can just go over and you break it in. In hindsight, I should have just done half on these boards that go across, and then I should have done half on the cross beam. So these 4x4s, they're going to go across where the legs join, and then the other 4x4 is going to go the length of the table. I should have done half and half, but this is what I ended up doing. So what I want to do is make sure that the 4x4 cross beam is going to fit in there, and it fits perfectly. I had to just cut it down a little bit. I don't know if you can see all the sawdust in my hair. And now I'm going to take my multi-tool, my oscillating tool, and I'm just going to trim all those little teeth from using my miter saw in the little sections. And that way the cross beam will sit nice and flush and look much better. Once this sits flush, I am going to use the Simpson Strong Tie L brackets, which are actually outdoor brackets, to connect those shorter beams to the insides of the legs. And what you want to do is make a pilot hole first. So you always want to make a pilot hole first, especially when you're going into pine, but in particular because these screws are very thick and you will crack your wood if you do not do a pilot hole. So do a pilot hole first, and you want your drill bit to be slightly smaller than the size of your screws, so that way they will still connect in there. If you make your drill bit too big, it's just going to be spinning like it's almost stripped. So make sure that your drill bit is slightly smaller, and then what you're going to do is I am taking my impact drill, but they do have bits for regular drills to be able to put these in here. I'm going to connect this to the bottom. So this is the bottom of that beam that goes in between the legs. I'm going to connect it, make sure it's in the right place, and then tighten it. If for some reason it doesn't, if it's not square, you can loosen it a little bit. So I'm going to show you here. You're going to do your pilot hole, and then you're going to connect them. And again, these are the bottoms. if for some reason that little L bracket doesn't move flush, so you want the L bracket to line up with the edge of it. If for some reason it moves, you can always just pull it back a little bit, straighten it, and then tighten it again. You see right here, this is what I had to do. Straighten it and then tighten it again by pushing down pressure so it doesn't move. So you can see the bottom right here, and this is the end of the table. So I'm just lining this up. I want to say that the plans called for 6 inches from the bottom of the leg to where you line up these cross brackets right here. So you'll have to check out the plans. I can't remember in particular, but now I'm just joining this to the leg so that way we have this to be sturdy. But I am going to do these L brackets on the opposite side, so on the top end of here, and we're going to use a different hardware for it, but this is how we're going to connect these beams to our legs. So we are going to use these hex head washers and then structural wood screws, and this is still Simpson strong tie, and this is just going to add a cool element to it. Now in the plans in particular, it called for these on the bottom as well, but you can do whatever you want. I did end up spray painting the bottom so that those screws were not silver, but you can do whatever you want. I just didn't feel like you weren't going to see them, and so I didn't use them on the bottom. I wanted to make sure that I used them on the top because it does add a cool element. So again, do your pilot hole, and then you're going to drill these into the top part, and it's just going to add more, it's going to make it more secure. So you're going to have brackets on the bottom and the top of these cross beams in between the legs. Okay, so here is the bottom of the piece. Now, if you can see that 2x4 cross support bracket in the center, I ended up putting 2 more in there. So I put 1 in the middle of the left, in the middle of the right side. I felt like it was better for the top of the table. Now what I'm doing is laying down the top board so that I can make sure that they are all going to fit. And this is how I'm going to measure the top of my table. So I do have breadboard ends. And so I'm using 2x10s for my breadboard ends and for the top. And so I'm just going to cut all of these top parts. And again, remember, I am cutting the edge of that board because this board is going to have to sit flush with the breadboard end, and so when you cut the edges off, you make sure that it's all square, and that way it's going to be able to be flush. So now I cut the edge off, and now I'm going to measure it. I'm going to cut it to size for the 4 boards. So I have 4 2x10s going across, and then I have 2 breadboard ends at the end. So again, this table is about 4 feet wide and about 7 feet long. You want to follow the teeth of your saw. So if you see that the teeth of my saw are pointing to the back of the saw, what I'm going to do is, because this is a miter saw and it's a telescopic miter saw, so I'm able to pull the telescopic part all the way to the back of the board. So this is a 2x10, which is particularly long. I pull it all the way back, start my saw, go down carefully, and then I push back. So I'm going with the teeth of my blade. Once I have cut the top, I'm going to make a V on here with a pencil. And this is so I can take all these boards and put them on a flat surface so I can line them up and I can mark where all of my pocket holes are going to be. I want them on a flat surface because it's going to make it a lot easier. You're not going to have to plane your piece of wood. You'll just have to possibly sand it. If you saw what I just did, I swept under where the wood is going to be. You want to make sure you have a clean surface. You want to sweep so that way there is no sawdust, there's no debris underneath there, so that everything sits flush. And now what I'm doing is I am taking a construction tee and I am going to make sure that all of these boards are lined up perfectly with one another. I am going to take this longer tee and I am going to mark where I want my pocket holes. When I'm doing a tabletop, I always do opposite. So what I do is I'll do one on one side and then I go on the other side of the boards. So you want to alternate where your screws are, and it just helps to strengthen and keep things straight and make sure that things don't get all kind of twisted. And so I alternate what side my screws are going to go in. Once I do this, I drill all my pocket holes, which I showed you how to use the Kreg jig earlier. And then I'm gonna put my 2.5 inch Kreg screws into everything. So I am, for this whole build, gonna be using 2.5 inch Kreg screws to join everything together. You are gonna need help for this. You don't wanna do this, you'll hurt your back. So I am just, the table is flipped upside down so that I can sand where all those pocket holes are, so I can smooth it out. That way nobody's clothes get snagged and no one gets hurt or gets a splinter. And then I am just bringing this inside. I am using my 5-inch Random Orbital by Surf Prep, and I am going to sand down the entire top. It is connected to my vacuum, so there's no dust coming off. I'm going to start with an 80 grit, go up to 100 grit, and then go up to 120 grit on this entire piece, and just carefully take my time and sand this entire top down. For the top of this, I'm using General Finishes Gel Stain and Antique Walnut and Candelite. I'm going to do a mixture of both, an even mixture, 1 for 1. And I'm going to take, what I like to use is these microfiber little sponges, and I'm just going to go with the wood grain and add this stain to the entire top of the table. I decided I wanted some of the space in between just to add character, and so I'm taking a cheap chip brush and I'm going to take the stain and go in all the little cracks and crevices, so that way it is completely stained and you don't see any of the raw wood. I was thinking about cutting down and ripping the sides of the board so everything was flush, but I decided I actually like the character of it, and so I wanted it to look like there were cracks, and that's how you get in between them. And then once I'm done, I'm going to paint the bottom of the table with Country Chic's color in Soiree. I'm using Soiree. It is a tan color, and so I'm going to paint the entire bottom with this. When you're sealing the top of your piece, you're gonna wanna take a tack cloth and get all of the dust and debris off first, and then you wanna go in with your sealer. I am using Paint Couture's Extreme Guard top coat, and I really like it. It created a nice sheen on it, and I'm complete. Okay, so I'm trying to get at a good angle here. It's done. I also have painted my dining room, and then I did an accent wall over here, and so I'm gonna show that to you. That is just MDF boards, and I showed it over on my YouTube or on my Instagram. I am going to build a couple benches for this, and then there's a couple chairs that are on their way, just metal chairs, because I wanna do kind of an industrial farmhouse look in here. But I'm gonna take a couple pictures so that you can see them, and this is done. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Happy creating, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Hey, darling, can I tell you what's been on my mind? Sick and tired of the 9 to 5 in the city life. Hey, darling, we could get out of town, see the beautiful world around, wanna see it now. Pack our bags and get in that car, leave a little note and we'll drive real far. Let's get out, we can leave this city, let's drive to the open air. Yeah, the countryside is so pretty.